August 1942. In a remote corner of the South Pacific lies a humid, insect-ridden island covered in jungle, Guadalcanal. Few had heard its name, yet here the fate of the Pacific War would be decided. The young Marines who stepped ashore that morning had no idea they were walking into a battle that would turn paradise into hell. After months of painful losses, America was looking for a way to strike back. The victory at Midway had crippled Japan's navy, but it hadn't yet changed the balance of power. Across the Pacific, Japan still controlled a long chain of islands stretching from Rabaul to the Solomons, a defensive wall that threatened Allied supply lines between the United States and Australia. If those routes were cut, the entire southern front could collapse. Then in July 1942, American reconnaissance discovered something alarming. The Japanese were building an airfield on Guadalcanal. Once completed, enemy bombers could dominate the sea lanes for thousands of miles. Washington gave the order, "Take the island." Immediately, over 11,000 U.S. Marines under Major General Alexander Vandegrift set sail for the island. The Japanese had only a small garrison, engineers and construction troops, guarding the unfinished airstrip. The first American offensive of the Pacific War had begun. It was expected to last a few days. Instead, it became a 6-month nightmare that would consume tens of thousands of lives in jungle, disease, hunger, and fire. Guadalcanal, a name once unknown, would become the turning point no one expected, the moment when the tide of war began to change. Morning, August 7, 1942. American transport ships approached Lunga Point. Landing craft hit the beaches. Wave after wave of Marines wade ashore. No gunfire, no fierce resistance. The Japanese are caught completely off guard. Within 2 days, the Marines seized the unfinished airfield. Weeks later, it's completed and renamed Henderson Field in honor of a fallen pilot from Midway. But the celebration doesn't last long. On the night of August 8th, the Japanese Navy strikes back in the Battle of Savo Island. 4 U.S. cruisers are sunk. Over 1,000 sailors are killed. The surviving ships withdraw, leaving more than 11,000 Marines stranded, alone, undersupplied, and surrounded. No ships, no food, no medicine. Rain falls endlessly. Malaria spreads. The men begin calling it the Island of Death. Yet from that despair, something changes. The Marines adapt. They dig in, they repair the airfield, and they prepare to fight. When Japanese reinforcements land in mid-August, the Americans stand their ground at the Tenarue River and Edson's Ridge. For the first time in the Pacific, U.S. forces repel massive Japanese assaults. One sergeant wrote in his diary, "We weren't fighting for glory. We were fighting to see the sunrise. Guadalcanal was now drenched in blood." But for the first time there was belief that the United States could win. From September through November 1942, Guadalcanal descended into hell. Every day brought air raids. Every night, flares, gunfire, and the sound of Japanese troops advancing through the jungle. They called their nightly supply runs the Tokyo Express. Destroyers dashed in under darkness, unloading troops and ammunition, then vanished before dawn. At the heart of it all stood Henderson Field, the lifeline of the island. If it fell, the Marines would lose everything. The Japanese knew it. They launched 3 major offensives in September, October, and November. The most brutal came in the battle for Henderson Field, October 23rd to 26th. 3,000 Japanese stormed the perimeter defended by 2,500 Marines. By sunrise, over 2,200 Japanese lay dead. Fewer than 100 Americans had fallen. It was no longer a battle. It was slaughter. The stench of death hung over the jungle. Bodies rotted in the rain. Malaria and starvation became as deadly as bullets. A Navy doctor recorded, 2 out of 3 men were sick. At night we heard them screaming in fever, and by morning they were gone. Out at sea, the fighting was just as savage. The Battle of Cape Esperance, the naval Battle of Guadalcanal, Tassafaronga, nights of fire and steel that claimed ships on both sides. But by late November, Japan's navy could no longer supply its troops. Guadalcanal was isolated. On land, Japanese soldiers began dying of hunger. They dug up roots. They ate bark. Some turned to the unthinkable. A Japanese officer wrote, "We are no longer soldiers, only ghosts." The struggle for Guadalcanal was no longer about victory. It was about survival. January 1943. At Japanese headquarters in Rabaul, the truth could no longer be denied. Guadalcanal was lost. A secret evacuation plan, Operation K, was set in motion. Under the cover of night, destroyers slipped in to rescue the survivors. 10,000 men were saved from the island's grasp. On February 9, 1943, the United States declared Guadalcanal secure. 6 months, 30,000 dead, hundreds of ships and aircraft lost. The campaign was over, but its impact would shape the rest of the Pacific War. Guadalcanal proved that Japan could be beaten. It ended the myth of invincibility and marked the beginning of the Allied advance. Through New Guinea, Tarawa, Saipan, Iwo Jima, and Okinawa. Today, the jungle has reclaimed the battlefields. Grass grows over bomb craters. Wrecked ships rest silent beneath the waves. And on the hills around Henderson Field, only the wind remains. A veteran once said, "Guadalcanal wasn't just where we fought. It was where we learned to survive, to trust, and to grow up." Guadalcanal, a small island, yet a monumental turning point. A campaign the world forgot, but history never will.